Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Smith, and I am the news editor at IndustryWeek. Welcome to Production Pulse, our biweekly live stream where we talk about issues important to the manufacturing world. Today, we'll be discussing mental health among manufacturing workers in recognition of May as Mental Health Awareness Month. So today, we'll be discussing mental health among manufacturing workers and leadership, mostly through a program launched by the National Council for Mental Wellbeing that has been designed to improve mental health literacy at manufacturing companies called Mental Health First Aid at Work. Today, we're joined by two national trainers from the program, Lynn Hennighausen and Rob Vallentine. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thrilled to be here.
Thank you for having us, Anna.
All right. So the Mental Health First Aid at Work program serves manufacturing as well as a couple other different industries. I was wondering, why do you think the manufacturing industry specifically needs mental health training? Is it a lack of awareness? Is there a stigma around those conversations? Just anything about discussions in the manufacturing field?
So there are any number of reasons that it makes sense for us to look at the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing is consistently named as one of the most challenging workplaces when it comes to mental health challenges and substance use disorders and even suicide. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Some of the reasons include things like repetitive action, the monotonous tasks that sometimes are required, safety hazards, irregular schedules, concerns about layoffs. All of those things contribute to this space where it's really important to have to start these conversations.
So what sort of, I know you mentioned along with mental health, substance abuse issues, what kind of mental health challenges do you see facing the employees? Are there some trends in this industry that stand out more than others because it's, like you said, such a high pressure work environment?
There are some, for sure, some things that stand out. I think, one of the things that I think we really need to talk about and focus on is the stigma that is front and center when it comes to all of us, oftentimes, but specifically in industries like manufacturing, where there is this idea that asking for help means that we're weak, that reaching out for help means that we can't handle our job. And so there's this internal stigma that many of us have that says, if I just tried harder, if I just worked harder, if I just prayed harder, I'd be okay. And then we're feeling this pressure that says, if you just tried harder, if you just were stronger, if you prayed more, you would be okay. And what if we were in this culture where asking for help was okay? Because we know that early intervention works. And when we get help, recovery happens. Recovery is expected in 2025 with early intervention.
So specifically, the Mental Health First Aid at Work training program consists of 4 courses called, Intro, Certification, Champion, and Transform. I was wondering if you guys could tell me just about these courses and how they build on each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to jump in on this one, Anna. We know that not only is a certification important, but we know that that is really the beginning, if you will. And so when you take mental health first aid, and I want to imagine a world where we didn't have CPR, imagine a world of where we don't have physical health first aid. And mental health first aid is really a training that allows people to talk about noticing signs and symptoms and then how to respond. And so what we do is when we start with a company or an organization, we start with a self-paced 2-hour course that people take on their own. And it is a great opportunity for them to really really start talking about stigma, really learning a little bit more about, educating themselves about the power of first person language and how it might impact them. They then come to a course, whether that's on Zoom or in person, called Mental Health First Aid Certification at Work. And what we do there is we spend, 4 hours with a group of folks, and we use videos and we use all kinds of different ways of interacting with the folks in the class. And we talk about noticing signs and symptoms, and then again, taking a 5-step action plan on what you can do to help someone. And I know as I look back on my journey, my mental health journey, is I realized that a lot of people around me didn't notice, and they didn't know how to respond when certain symptoms or signs were happening in my own life. And I spent 31 years in a manufacturing company. And, it was sort of an environment where we focused a lot on physical safety, but not always on the psychological safety. So that's segment number one, if you will, or the first course is certification. Right? The second one really gets us into, I'll say the first one being the intro, which is the 2-hour. Then it's the certification course. Then we jump into what's called Champion. And I have had the opportunity of teaching the Champion course and facilitating it, where these are folks that have gone through certification. They feel really good about, they've been trained, they understand how to notice, they know how to respond. They start to realize there's a lot of resources out there. And the Champion really refines those skills, but then also helps them know how in their organization can they be a better champion. That champion may be telling their own journey. Maybe it's being a champion because you understand the resources, you know the benefits that are offered in the company. Maybe it's about, supporting and volunteering in a community. So out of that Champion program, they really learn what they can do to help others that might be struggling in their organization. And then the fourth one is about transform. It's not just mental health first aid that changes an organization. They then need to take a look at what are their strengths. Where are the opportunities for changes that might need to happen? What are, so you think about an organization that they realize that their benefits aren't equal for physical health and mental health. So in Transform, what happens is it's usually the HR team and other leaders that are looking at how do they change their policies and procedures or update them to make sure that they're addressing mental health.
So kind of to go over a little bit, just a kind of a quick snapshot of the content in the program. Can you tell me about one of the biggest themes, which is the Mental Health First Aid Action Plan that you teach about, called ALGE?
Yeah, so ALGE is the action plan, and it really starts with that approach. How are we going to approach someone who we think might be experiencing a mental health challenge? We've noticed some signs and symptoms, right? We've noticed some changes in a colleague, and we're ready to say, hey, I'm wondering if you're okay. The L in the action plan is listening non-judgmentally, right? That active listening, that listening to learn instead of listening to fix. Giving reassurance and information is my favorite letter. It's the unsung hero. It is the I see you and I care about you and I'm connected with you. And then we move on to the 2 E's. The first one is encouraging appropriate professional help, which highlights the resources that a manufacturing organization has available to its employees. Right? We know that there are resources in most organizations. There's an employee assistance program. There are medical benefits that someone can be a part of. We also know that most of the time we talk about EAP on the first or second day of employment, and people aren't retaining that. And so how do we continue to offer those resources and make sure people understand that they're confidential, right? That they're a beautiful benefit, often underutilized. So that's that E, encouraging appropriate professional help. And then the last E is encouraging self-help and other support strategies, which is what are the things that we can do for ourselves to cope when things are hard, right? And so that is the LG Action Plan.
So I know we've talked about this. This has also been talked about, how mental health literacy can, along with boosting personal things that are going on like inside one person, Like, how can mental health literacy also benefit the manufacturing company as a whole in terms of, operations, like employee retention, safety, and productivity?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. And I think if you think about what many of these manufacturing companies go through as far as having employee burnout, you think about the decreased productivity because someone is struggling on the inside. They're distracted because of a relationship issue, or they're distracted because they're very anxious over they just went through a weather type of trauma. That they came into work and they were distracted. You think about absenteeism that happens. You think about turnover. We think about workplace conflict. And so all of that may show up within an organization. And so I think that a lot of times organizations recognize that if people can come into work healthy, they are just better employees. And it really does affect the bottom line for that company. And I think about, if employees feel like they can bring, again, like I mentioned, their whole self into the workplace, then they can ask for help from people around them. Or like Lynn was talking about, the resources is being able to be connected. Do they have an employee assistance program that would allow them to start that outreach for getting some support when they need to talk to somebody? Do they have benefits? And does that cover them? It might cover a physical as an example, but does it cover if they need therapy? And I think the third part of it is do they understand the community they're in, to know that there are lots of community resources out there that can help and support them. So that's one of the reasons why I think companies are really more and more companies are bringing this training in for those reasons.
And thanks, Robin. I would add that manufacturing already has the infrastructure for this. Right? Manufacturing does a fabulous job of talking about safety and having tools around safety, talking about falls, talking about physical first aid, talking about ergonomics, talking about the risk of fatigue, right? And so when we start to think about 1 in 5 people are experiencing any given year are experiencing a mental health challenge. So if we do the math, right, and divide however many manufacturing employees an organization has divided by 5, right? That's how many people are likely experiencing a mental health challenge, right? And that means there may be a decrease in focus, decrease in being able to make good decisions, more accidents, less communication, less teamwork, a less sustainable workforce. And so by offering something like mental health first aid, another tool in that safety toolkit, those things change and they're measurable. There is a business case for manufacturers to implement programs like mental health first aid at work.
Mm-hmm. Lynn, I know you've said when we've spoken in the past that all of the training and the ideals aren't something that's going to just happen overnight.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could tell me how you would like this training to, be a starting point for creating a supportive company culture overall.
Beautiful. I'll start and then Rob, take it. So for me, as Lynn Hennighausen, not national trainer, but just Lynn Hennighausen, it has to start at the top, right? Leaders have to buy into this idea that it's important. And leaders can do that in a lot of different ways, through storytelling, right? Through their own experience, or bringing someone in like Rob or somebody else to talk about their experience in that environment. That changes lives. Story is a catalyst for change. And then if we start to have these conversations through the e-learning platform, that first level, so everybody is having some exposure to this idea of mental health first aid and how to support one another. There's a shared language, right? There's a shared knowledge about how to approach, how to listen, how to give reassurance and information, right? How to implement that mental health first aid plan. And then starting to build the infrastructure where lots of people are experiencing mental health first aid at work. And then we have folks who become, those ambassadors within the workplace. So it isn't a, this is not a check the box kind of deal, right? To change culture, to increase normalization around mental health first aid at work, we have to take it to work, and we have to make sure that everybody has exposure.
Yeah, and I would add, Lynn, that what we recognize that usually happens, I'd say about halfway through the certification training, where people recognize that this training, mental health first aid, not only helps me in the workplace, but it really helps me in my life, whether that's with a neighbor at home in their community, whether it's with a family member, or whether it's with themselves. And so when you asked earlier, Ann, about the allergy action plan, I think about it and relate it to my own life, right? I have to assess what is going on with myself, right? What are the things that I might be struggling with? And then I need to listen, right? I need to listen to my body and listen to what I'm saying to myself. And I got to give myself reassurance that there's hope and there's healing out there. And I know that. And then sometimes I got to encourage myself, right? Like, it's okay. I would tell you I'm going to the dentist. I would tell you I'm getting my car tuned up. Would I be willing to tell you that I'm going to therapy? And the answer is yes, because I've learned that that is strength, right? That's not weakness. And so it might be encouraging professional help, but it might also be looking at encouraging self-help. Maybe it's time for me to connect through a phone call to someone that I know is a really good listener. Maybe it's time for me to connect with a support group that I know might be helpful for whatever it is that I might be going through on that time. So ALGAE is not just something that's a 5-step action plan for those people, right? It's an action plan that we can use in our lives, our daily personal lives, as well as professional lives. And I find that whether it's whether it's restaurants, whatever the industry is, as earlier before we started the call, Lynn and I mentioned that we were at a university yesterday, right? The university is bringing this training in because they want to support at this time their athletes and their staff, because they recognize, that, wow, we are in a time where we all need that extra support to work through the difficult times.
Great. So that was all that I had for you today. So I just wanted to thank you both so much again for speaking with us today on such an important topic. To everyone watching, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and be sure to join us again in 2 weeks for our next Production Pulse.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.